That is the dark side, but there is a very bright side for the choleric. The choleric has some very great attributes. The choleric is a born leader. As one author put it, the choleric will look out through the bars of their cribs and plan how soon they will take over for mom. You can sometimes see this, even in the smallest children. The choleric child is very noticeable. You can pick out their temperament right away. With them, it's not a question of will they take control, but when. The good side of this is that the choleric, being a leader, can accomplish great things. They are sure of what they do. Others feel secure and confident in following and working with them. You know when you're working on a project with a choleric that ultimately everything will get done and will turn out right. And that is something to appreciate. There's nothing worse than working with someone who is insecure and vacillating. I think we ought to put this, I'm not sure, what do you think we ought to do? I'm not sure either. You know, maybe we should wait till tomorrow about this. And the person stands there with their tools. Come on. It's very difficult to work with someone who's very insecure about their job. When you have a choleric involved, there's no problem there. They're standing there. You don't even have to ask them what to do. They'll let you know. And most of the time, they're accurate. So that is a great quality of the choleric. They are outspoken enough to step in, take control of a situation, and they usually do put things right. The choleric's strong will can be a great asset. The choleric is decisive. All organizations, businesses, families need the strength of will and the ability to make decisions. This comes pre-packaged in a choleric. They can make decisions right away. Where others can't even make up their minds, the choleric will decide instantly. They solve problems and they save time for everybody. Cholerics are great workers. In fact, most cholerics can hardly be without work. They use every moment. The choleric is the type of person that if you said to them, oh, let's sit down and watch a movie together, and you sit down, and while the sanguine is popping popcorn in their mouth and stretched out on the couch in their slippers, the phlegmatic is comfortably snoring by there, the melancholic is in the room reading a book, and the choleric says, oh yes, I'll watch a movie with you. And they come out, and they open up their briefcase, and they start in, organizing themselves for tomorrow's sales calls. And you say, I thought you were going to watch a movie. Oh, I am. You might as well get something done, though, while we're doing this. Just as the sanguine always wants to mix pleasure with the required business, so the choleric always wants to mix business with that required pleasure. Cholerics organize well. One of the cleric's greatest assets is his ability to accomplish more than anyone else, aided by his gift for organization. When he looks at a task, he can instantly see how it should be handled, how it should be divided. Mentally, he mixes it up into chunks of work and figures out how many people he needs for each crew. Though he prefers to just do the whole task himself, since after all, he can do it best, yet, if he does have a task force available, he will portion out the chores. In fact, he finds it easy to give responsibilities to idle bystanders. In his own mind, anyone would rather work than sit around. So he naturally steps forward and gives all those idle people something to do, thinking that, of course, they'll appreciate this. The power of organization for a cleric comes very naturally. I just read a little story about two women who went to an occasion, a buffet type thing. It was like a club luncheon. And they were in line, and the tables were organized in a V, and everyone had to go up and get their food and then go back to their tables. And it was a very long line, and things weren't working just right. By the time they got back to their table, one of the women said, you know, I would have laid the tables out differently. And the other woman said, so would I. I was thinking the same thing. Both women were choleric, and both of them told each other how they already figured out that the table should have been laid out, how the line should have moved, They just naturally figure out in an instance how things can be better organized. Choleric mothers often run their home in a very organized, smooth, and efficient way because of their ability to organize and their willingness to distribute work to their children. Choleric mothers often have lists of chores, schedules even for their children. Most importantly, they have the strength and the perseverance to follow up on any task that they've delegated to their children. See, some mothers do this. Maybe they resolve, this week I'm going to have a whole list of chores for the kids. So they scribble it up, paste it on the refrigerator, and the kids kind of look and go, and they know within 2 days, Mom's going to forget the whole thing anyway. They know. They're like, oh yeah, sure, Mom. Most mothers who are not choleric, it's much harder for them to naturally do this. And so a lot of mothers, as we spoke the other day, especially about melancholic mothers, they will often give up and do everything themselves because they're the slave of the home. But choleric mothers are mothers that the other temperaments could learn from. They delegate the work, they organize it, and they keep after the children. Mothers of other temperaments sometimes see the choleric's organization as too much. But it truly makes for a happy and efficient home. Observe it. I observe it myself. Organizing and training the children to work when they are young helps them to be disciplined workers. Many mothers ignore the potential labor force that they have free in their home, and instead hire maids to come in and do the work. And their lazy children lounge around chewing on apples and bananas while the hired work comes in to do everything. There is a labor force that's there free of charge, but besides that, the reason that most mothers give up on this is because it's too much work to set up a system, to delegate responsibility, and most of all, it's too much work to nag the children. Choleric parents teach their children to work, and they teach them how to work. And that is something that I think all mothers can learn from choleric mothers, how to organize, persevere in keeping after the children, to teach them how to work and to make them work. Cholerics are goal-oriented. The choleric is always more interested in achieving goals than just pleasing people. The positive to this is that they usually end up on the top. For instance, very often in the work world, cholerics rise very quickly because they're so goal-oriented. The negative of this, though, is that they often end up on top all alone. It's like the choleric president of a women's club. She set unbelievable goals for her club. She organized the members. She herself worked very hard, and she worked her members very hard. She kept on everyone's back to make sure that all was being done. At the end of her term, as the president of her club won more awards than any other and accomplished more and raised more funds than any other club. But at the end of her own term, she confessed, I don't have a friend left in this group. If you want goals to be accomplished well and fast, ask a choleric to run things. The choleric works hard, is organized, and is very goal-oriented. The choleric not only likes to achieve goals, but they thrive on what other temperaments find difficult. They thrive on opposition. If a sanguine sets out to accomplish a task, and someone says, it can't be done, the sanguine says to them, oh, thank you. The sanguine thanks them profusely for warning them ahead of time. And then the sanguine quits and goes on to something else without a second thought. The melancholic is told that task cannot be done. The melancholic says, I knew it from the start that it couldn't be done. I knew it was impossible. But the thing that makes me so sad now is that I have spent so much time planning and analyzing this situation. And they go away sad over the whole thing, over having started and over having to quit. The phlegmatic is grateful that the task can't be done. Because it sounded like too much work from the start. But the choleric, you tell the choleric that a job is impossible, and it's like whetting his appetite. If you ask the choleric to do something, he say, okay. But if you said, I'm asking you to do something that can't be done, then he says, okay. A whole different story. It's like the wife who wanted her husband to hang up curtains. She knew if she asked him when he came home, could you hang up these curtains? He'd say, oh, yes. But instead, she spoke to her mother about the curtains. And her mother said, well, he won't know how to hang those up. And so she knew. When the husband came home, the wife said, oh, we have these curtains to hang up, but my mother said you won't know how to hang them up anyway. Well, that was it. He got right up, and those curtains were hung. Because he now had an opposition. Someone said it couldn't be done, so he would do it, and do it now. The choleric longs to accomplish the difficult. He enjoys succeeding where others say it can't be done. The choleric is competitive, daring, and bold. The choleric doesn't shrink from difficulty. I remember there was a question that we used to use to sort of classify personalities. It's not a foolproof one, but it is sometimes revealing. And I think I was in college at the time, and this was something that was going around to classify personalities. And it was a question that you were supposed to answer in your mind, not with a lot of figuring, but just like what would be your instant answer. And the question was this. The question was, you're walking down a street, down a path, and you're going to a particular place. As you're walking down the path, you then see before you a brick wall. What would you do? You don't have to say out loud. Okay. You should just have an instant answer, which you should just hold on to. You don't want to change it. For the most part, what happens with this question is, now again, it's not foolproof. I tried it at dinner and forget it. You never test anything on nuts. It's true. Don't test anything on nuts. They ruin every survey, every test. The bishop has always said that, and I know now exactly what it means. They make everything so complicated. Because they think all these things you never thought of. So, this is what it's supposed to be. The melancholic would say to that, well, how big is the wall? Is there some other road to take? Can I walk around it? I don't understand this question. I need a lot more information before. I have to analyze this whole thing. I need a lot more information. Okay? That would be the melancholic. They need a lot more information. How could you answer this question with just that much information? The phlegmatic, generally, the phlegmatic would say, I don't know, I might just sit down and rest a while. Or I might just quit and go home. The sanguine says, I know what I do. I go around the wall. Or even better, maybe what I do is I step back about 10 feet, like there I am on the road, right? See me? I'm wearing my good sneakers. I'm way back, about 10 feet. I look at this wall, there I am. And now I get a running start. And then I run. And when I get close enough, I jump to the top of the wall. Ta-da! That would be the thing. Make the whole story of the whole thing. And then they'd say, do you want to hear another story? I can think of another one. The choleric. The choleric would, at first, not even want to play this game. This whole thing is really quite stupid. But once their spouse convinced them they had to play, oh, what a waste of time. All right, I'm on the street. There's a wall. Now what? Well, what would you do? Well, if the wall was in my way, I'd get it out of my way. I would blow it up. Dynamite it. Or I'd get some heavy machinery and just knock it down. And if it's small enough, you just climb over it. That would be the normal response for choleric. Climb over it or knock it out of the way. That is the way cholerics view opposition. Opposition to them is something to be shoved out of the way. Climb over it. No need to think about it, just knock it over, shove it out of the way. The choleric has a desire to beat the odds. They're not discouraged by walls, by obstacles, or by criticism. They put their eye on a goal, and they thrive on any opposition along the way that actually ends up encouraging them toward their goal. See, with other temperaments, they have a goal, and there's opposition, and that tries to keep them from achieving their goal. For the choleric, opposition makes them go faster, makes them accomplish even more to get to their goal. The choleric is usually talented, smart, quick to respond, and they don't panic when trouble comes their way. And they don't quit when trouble comes their way. For these reasons, the choleric is the best person to have around in case of an emergency. It's sometimes interesting to look back on an incident and to see how the different temperaments responded to that incident. When there is some emergency, someone gets hurt or something happens, the different temperaments respond, often in a particular way. The phlegmatic, for instance, doesn't panic when there is some disaster, but he responds too slowly and often just doesn't know what to do. The melancholic is great to sit by your bedside, to hold your hand, to sympathize with you. But when the emergency first happens, they're slow to react. It takes them a long time to figure out, what should I really do? What is the best way to deal with this? It takes a lot of time for them to figure it out, and so oftentimes they do just stay there and hold the person's hand, when actually they should maybe be dialing 911. The sanguine is quick to react, but their response is often erratic, haphazard, emotional. They jump around saying, "Oh no, how could this happen?" Then maybe they cry, then maybe they grab the person's hand, then they run and get a glass of water and come back and realize maybe they should have got the Band-Aid, then they run off and get the Band-Aid, then they come back and yell, "Somebody do something!" Then they kneel down and try to crack jokes and cheer the person up. They do react, but not always in the best fashion. But the choleric, in a time of emergency, steps in and does just what's needed. They're intelligent, they're smart, they respond quickly, they know what to do. They rise to the unexpected situation. An unexpected situation is like an opposition for them. They're on duty. The choleric naturally steps in like, this is my time, this is my job. And so, in a time of emergency, it's very helpful to have a choleric around. I still remember having 7 brothers. It was always an emergency. Every week we were in the hospital. So my poor mother. We went on vacation for like 2 weeks, usually in the summer, to this particular place. And the people in the emergency room just knew my family. We were there all the time. We were only up there 2 weeks a year, but we went in and out of the emergency room. Our brothers were always cutting something open and breaking something, and there was always something. But it was interesting sometimes afterwards we talk about everybody's response. Sometimes it'd be the most unexpected responses. You know, these big burly men standing behind a tree and crying because they didn't know what to do. The other guy hurt himself. But the choleric would step forward, take the person's arm, know just what to do. Recently, it was interesting because the sisters had a little accident up at Round Top while they were playing hockey, actually. And while they were playing, one sister got the hockey puck in the face. It ended up that it wasn't a major emergency, but you know how it is with the nose. You know, something gets hit and the nose will start to bleed. You have a nosebleed. So right away, of course, some of the sisters were frozen in shock because it looked so horrible. Some just turned away. And of course, there's always a melancholic in the bunch who has to say, "I knew this would eventually happen." And there's usually a melancholic who will sit down and hold the sister's hand who's wounded and try to comfort her. And then, of course, there's the sanguine who tries to joke and keep everybody cheery through the whole thing. And in the meantime, fortunately, there was a choleric there who immediately took control. Sister, get a towel, water. All right, put your head down. Don't lean back. Ice pack. Everybody ready? When the whole thing was over, the other sister said, "Boy, it sure was nice that Sister Mary Choleric was in here. She just took control of everything. Nobody knew what to do." Sure enough, she did. She stepped right in. Everybody was on duty, knew what to do. And the whole situation was taken care of because a choleric was there in a time of emergency. In regard to the spiritual life, the choleric's single-minded determination is a great asset in the progress of virtue. In regard to the bright side of their spiritual life, this is very, very helpful. They are so determined. And so this makes them, if they apply this properly, this makes them acquire virtue. If the choleric develops his faculties and uses them for good and noble purposes, he can do great, great things for the honor of God and the good of his fellow man. He has a natural enthusiasm, the choleric, for the noble and the great. His force and resolution of will, once it's set to good purpose, helps him not to shrink from difficulties. He can be magnanimous and noble. He can overcome crosses, difficulties. He can endure great sacrifices and sufferings for the love of God if he sets his mind on that goal. And so he can become a very great saint if he really applies himself to that goal, that no matter what, I will become a saint. And that is why there are so many choleric saints. Because when a choleric sets his mind on a goal, difficulties are no problem. They're just something else to overcome. And so they can set that goal, and then they set forth on a path of acquiring virtue after virtue and of loving God greatly amidst great difficulties. In regard to prayer, the choleric, being a man of reason, benefits because he does not rely on imagination and feeling. He can persevere in prayer once he sets his mind to do so. Lack of feeling is inconsequential to him. He wants results. And once he understands that feeling doesn't matter, he forges ahead. The choleric can persevere amidst dryness. The choleric usually meditates well on an intellectual point. He can be recollected in prayer because his strong will he uses to banish distractions, and especially because, by force of his nature, he can, with great facility, concentrate his attention even on one point, because he uses that forceful character to do what he knows he ought to do. Now, we've spoken about the negative and positive attributes of cholerics. Now, an important point for those who are not cholerics is how to live with cholerics. So now I turn my mind to those who have to live with cholerics. The first thing to understand in dealing with powerful cholerics, whether it be in the house or in the workplace, is that they are born leaders. I stress the word born because it's important to understand that it is their nature that nudges them into control positions. You see, sometimes people become very threatened by cholerics because they feel the choleric is always pushing their way in and taking over, which is true. But once you understand that the choleric just does that naturally, then you won't take it so personally. They're born with a natural ability and a natural desire to just step in, direct, and lead. Once you understand their nature, full of positive traits, though sometimes carried to extremes, you won't be surprised or hurt when they step in and take charge. It's nothing personal against you. It's not because they don't like the way you yourself are doing something. It just happens naturally for a choleric that they step into a position and take control. Since the choleric naturally takes control, if you work, or especially if you live with the choleric, it's important to divide areas of responsibility. Decide at home or at the workplace who takes responsibility for what. Which area belongs to whom. Cholerics usually want the most practical plan, and they're not afraid of work. But if the duties are not clear, there will be conflict. If it isn't made clear, this is my job, so please let me do it the way I want to do it. If that's not made clear, the choleric will just naturally step in and always redo your job or tell you how to do it. Also, it's important with the choleric that you insist on a two-way communication. The controlling nature of the choleric makes it difficult for the partner to assert his will in household activities or plans, or for the partner at work to assert any will in the plans. In other words, the choleric takes over. And so it's very hard at times to say, excuse me, I do live here, because the choleric sometimes forgets that you have a voice in anything. Because of this problem, the one living with or working with the choleric must insist on a two-way communication. Insist is a strong word, but it's a needed one when you're conversing with a powerful choleric. One suggestion, for instance, for a woman with a choleric husband is to hear him out and to ask, can you have a 3-minute rebuttal time? Now I say 3 minutes because if you extend it much further, the choleric will say, forget it. Usually the choleric will pay attention if you are firm, clear, concise, friendly, and yet strong. Because powerful cholerics are so strong, those dealing with them have to counter with similar strength. Now, cholerics don't like to be treated with passion, with bitterness, or with anger, but cholerics respect someone who deals with them with strength. A choleric quickly sees illogical answers to situations, and they assume that you will want what they want. They just naturally assume that. They look at a situation, they see the answer, and they assume you'll want that too. Because after all, the choleric thinks this is what's right. Why would you want anything else? Once you have an understanding of their thinking pattern, that they just naturally figure everybody wants what they want, then you won't be put out or overly sensitive about the fact that they have designed your whole week for you without asking you about it. And so once you understand their thinking pattern, you can then stand firm with them, and you can demand a voice, a say. They will respect you for that position. When you allow a powerful choleric to push you around, the choleric will continue to do so. And actually, the choleric will not respect you for it. You actually need to be firm, logical, without passion, with a choleric. And you need to counter them with strength. Another important thing to remember in dealing with a choleric is that they say what they think instantly. They don't think about the feelings of others. They don't intend to hurt with their frankness or their abrupt manner. Most often, cholerics don't even realize that they're abrupt. They see themselves as honest, practical, unemotional. If you mention to a choleric that they have offended you with a particular statement, they most often will look surprised, maybe even hurt. They're hurt that you took offense. They'll explain, but I didn't mean to offend you. I was just stating a fact. Or, I was just speaking honestly. If a choleric says to you, I like your dress. In fact, I've liked it the last 10 times that I've seen it this month. And that's a very common type of thing a choleric would say. They would honestly come up to you at a party and say, I really like your dress. I've liked it all the 10 times I've seen it this month. Now, a melancholic, of course, would be greatly offended. A sanguine would, and would tell the choleric right there, maybe crack a joke about it, but for a choleric would be even surprised that you were offended by that. And so that's why if a choleric says that to you, you shouldn't go home and burn your dress if you've been worrying so much. The choleric wasn't trying to hurt you. He just said what was going through his mind in the order that it went through his mind. And he really meant that he liked it all 10 times. And so if you said to him, that was very offensive, the cleric would say, why was that offensive? I meant it. I have liked it every 10 times. They wouldn't even understand why it was offensive. And so it's important to know that in dealing with the choleric so that you don't take offense sometimes by what seems like a very cold statement. Another important point for those of different temperaments to realize is that cholerics are by nature not compassionate. In other words, they didn't work on becoming unsympathetic. They are by nature unsympathetic. The choleric deals in reality and practicality. The choleric does not naturally sit around and cry and feel sorry for things. He is not apt to have compassion for the sick or the weak. He's not apt to have love for the unlovely, and he's not apt to have time to visit hospitals. A choleric tends to look the other way when there are emotional needs to be filled, because they don't know what to do when emotional needs are there. And so they turn away and they let someone else, like a melancholic, deal with those things, because they don't feel they have what's there to deal with it. They don't mean to be cruel. They just don't naturally have a heart for the hurting. Remember, it's as if they had 2 heads and no heart. They naturally think and reason. They can come over and fix your plumbing. But if you want them to sit by your bed and sympathize with you, they'll say, I'll see you tomorrow. But if you said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll have a melancholic sit by my bed, can you come over and fix the plumbing? They'd say, absolutely, I'll be there in a minute. They have 2 heads and no heart. It's true that the cleric should aim to improve his feelings for people. But those that live or work with clerics should have an understanding that this does not come naturally to the cleric. He really has to work on this to acquire sympathy and compassion for others. Now the training for the cleric. In regard to the training of the cleric, the first thing for the cleric to do is to be convinced of what is the heart of his problem. The heart of the problem for the cleric is pride. The cleric rationalizes that the fault is in others rather than himself. That's normally what happens with a choleric. As long as he keeps rationalizing and excusing and shifting the guilt, there will be no improvement. If only the choleric would open his mind to examine his weakness and admit that he had a few, he could become the perfect person that he thinks he is. But first, he has to admit that he has faults. If the choleric can be convinced that he has a naturally abrasive nature, he will be the quickest to improve it, because he is goal-oriented, and he must prove to himself that he can conquer anything that he sets his mind to. Being convinced that his problem is pride, the cleric then should strive to work on it. And that means the cleric should right away start striving to cultivate humility. First thing to do that is admit faults. Admit them to himself and admit them to others. For example, the study of the temperaments should really help the cleric. The cleric should gain the most from this study. Why? Because he is able, by nature, to take dynamic strengths, to have a quick, decisive action, and then to put it into play to rid himself of his faults. By nature, he has the kind of character that once he sets his mind to something, he can do it. And so by studying the temperaments, the cleric should gain so much. And many clerics do. The study of the temperaments shows the choleric what to conquer, and so they set to action. But, unfortunately, some cholerics go to the opposite extreme. Just as I say, I think some of the cholerics benefit the most by this because of their determination. Some cholerics benefit not at all because they plug their ears. They aren't here tonight. They're the ones who didn't show up. They don't want to hear this stuff. Why? Because it's false. And so to them it's like, this doesn't concern me. Why do I need to know this? I know myself quite well enough. Me? Improve? Well, how can anyone else tell me what to work on? They naturally feel that way. And so that's where the problem is. And that's why they need to step aside and say, wait a minute, I have faults. I need to accept them, to look at them. And studying all the temperaments should show me certain things that I can work on. Admit faults. And then the choleric will make progress. They'll make progress in humility. And the next thing they need to do to make progress in humility is to let someone else be right. The choleric contends and argues and insists, even after he's been proven wrong. The choleric needs to let someone else be right, and even more, he needs to admit that someone else could be right. The choleric must make himself say those words, which are so hard for the choleric to say. He must be able to swallow his pride and say, you are right, and what's even more shocking, I am wrong. That is very hard for the choleric to do. Even sometimes when they will know it, it'll be really hard for them to say it. So that's why to really make strides in humility, it's really good for the choleric to force themselves to actually externalize that fact. To actually say, I want you to know that I know I was wrong. And it seems like such a simple thing to some people. But for a cleric, that's not so simple, and it is hard. But that is where strides will be made in regard to chopping down that huge tree of pride to really planting deep that root of humility by saying, I was wrong, and you are right. In this quest for humility, the choleric also should learn to apologize. Again, to some, it seems like a simple thing. To sanguines, it's like, oh, no problem, sorry, I'm sorry. This is sorry anyway. What's the big deal? Sorry. Right? Even to say I'm wrong, it's like, oh, I'm wrong. Hey, you want to go out tonight? For sanguine, but for a choleric, to actually say those words, I'm sorry, like swallowing the Adam's apple. Oh, it's hard. They need to learn to apologize. You see, the choleric looks at those words, I'm sorry, as a weakness, and they avoid its expression as they would a disease. One mother tells a story which illustrates this. A friend of her son came to live at their home for a year. This young man was their guest. His name was Robert, and he was of choleric temperament. He felt at home there, so comfortable was he that he began to even criticize at times things. Well, one morning, he came out after breakfast was over. The mother was there, and another one of her sons, and this guest, Robert, came down and opened up the cupboard. He pulled out a box of cold cereal. He took it out. It was the only one that was left. And he looked at it, and then he looked at this mother, and he said, you know, I don't like this kind of cereal. Can't you ever have anything that I like? Tossed the box on the counter, and he left without having breakfast. The mother's melancholic child was there. This young boy's name was Fred. And Fred came up to his mother, and he said, Mom, I want to apologize for Robert. He wasn't very nice to you about the cereal, but I know he'll never say he was sorry, so I'll say it for him. Very kind act of his melancholic toward his mother. It wasn't only kind, though, it was very perceptive, because Fred was right. The choleric guest, Robert, never apologized. He did refer to this occasion. He referred to it as, that unfortunate misunderstanding that you and I had over the cereal. It's very typical. The whole thing has turned into an unfortunate misunderstanding between the mother and Robert. And of course, there was no misunderstanding whatsoever, but in the mind of the choleric, it was now a misunderstanding. The choleric Robert could not admit to himself or to anyone else, I got angry. I was wrong. And he definitely couldn't say, I'm sorry. And so instead, he rationalized and changed the whole thing in his mind. Suddenly it became a misunderstanding about cereal. Cultivate humility. The choleric needs to cultivate humility by learning to apologize, admitting faults, and letting others be right. In regard to the cleric's battle against pride, he also has to work on his excessive desire to control. To do this, he must first respond well to the leadership of others. He must let others make decisions at times and organize functions. He must respond to events that he didn't plan and lead. He must show enthusiasm and interest when others are in control. And he must not pick and criticize if it wasn't his project. It's like maybe a woman has a dinner. She organizes the whole thing. It's great. Then if another woman has a dinner, the other woman organizes it and doesn't ask for this cleric person's help. And sometimes what the cleric does is they pick. The invitations didn't go out soon enough. No, we weren't even told what we were supposed to wear. What kind of function is this anyway? Does anyone even know what's going on about this? And then they go to the function, or sometimes, I'm not bothering to go. Why? Oh, well, why bother? The real reason why? Because I'm not controlling it. I only go if I control an event. Or if the cleric does go, it's, oh, what poor taste. Look at those napkins. There are no linen tablecloths. Oh my. Pick. Why? Is it because they have an attachment to napkins or tablecloths? No. It's because they aren't in control. Choleric's going to have a real problem with that, and that's why in order to work on that, in order to conquer what is really a manifestation of pride, they should go to the opposite extreme. What a wonderful event, everything's great. They should praise it, they should support it, and they should break down their own pride, which is eating away because they weren't in control. In working on his own excessive desire to control, the choleric must be watchful of one of his natural tools for control. And that is a natural tendency of the choleric to manipulate others. Cholerics want to accomplish. Cholerics want to succeed, and most want things their way. And so they will even use manipulation to get what they want or to get what they think is right. The choleric's greatest tools for manipulation are fear, guilt, and pity. Fear, an abrasive, forceful character, scares people into agreement with him. And at times the choleric will use fear to get everybody to say, don't you think this is a good idea? And everyone goes, yes, it's a great idea. Then later someone says, did you even ask anyone's opinion? And the cleric says, oh yes, I asked. Everybody said yes. But he doesn't say that he gave the eyes and the eyebrows. And it's the way he said, this is a great idea. It scared everybody into saying, wonderful idea, wonderful. Guilt. Sometimes the choleric will use guilt to shift guilt for an action to someone else. They will sometimes, instead of admitting, when I was at home, I blew my top, instead it'll be, when I was at home, you kids made me blow my top. When I was at home, you nagged me into becoming impatient. So it's your fault. And so then the other spouse has to go around feeling guilty because they made their spouse get angry. Instead of the cleric saying, I got angry. I was wrong. See? Instead they shift the guilt to, oh, I can't believe you all made me get angry. And the whole house has to feel guilty because they've made the person angry. Instead of the person who got angry saying, everybody, I blew it, I'm sorry, I got angry. So it's a whole shift of guilt, which is an amazing thing, because sometimes somebody will do something wrong, and everybody else in the house is sorry, but the person who did it. And you stand back and you wonder, how did that choleric do that? The whole family is feeling terrible, but him. And you wonder. And it's because his powers of manipulation are great. He can use that guilt and wield it right around. And the other thing he can use, when that fails to work, all the house says, look, you're the one who got angry. Then it's, oh, what a day. Oh, you don't know what I've been through. Oh, it's been so much. After all I've been through today, and then I come home. Woe is me, what burdens I carry. And I collapse into the chair. And then everybody in the house has to feel this great pity for this poor choleric who's been through so much that it's made him blow his top at everybody in the house. Because everybody has to feel great pity for the choleric, rather than the choleric saying, we all have problems, and I blow up when I get them. Instead, shifts it to everybody feels sorry for me because my life is so hard. The cleric has to see when he just naturally starts wielding these tools and to catch it and to realize these are tools that I use to shift responsibility for my own faults, rather than just saying, I'm a crab and I really should not be treating people like this. Instead of saying that, they shift it with guilt, with pity, or with fear. And so the cleric needs to catch themselves using these tools of manipulation. And they also need to realize that manipulation is a very unappealing trait. People eventually catch on, and they don't like to be manipulated. To keep friends and business associates for any period of time, the choleric must stop manipulating and become open with others. And to grow in humility, the choleric has to not use tools of manipulation to fool himself about his own problems. In regard to dealing with others, the choleric needs to, most of all, practice patience. He needs to see that he is often abrasive and abrupt, just by nature. The choleric can't see sometimes why others don't keep up with him. The cleric feels that quiet people must be stupid. The cleric looks at a quiet person and thinks, don't you have a thought in that head of yours? You haven't said anything. You must be dumb. They just naturally think that. The cleric thinks a non-aggressive person is, what a wimp. You are a weakling. They naturally find quiet and non-aggressive people to be weaklings or dummies. And they tend to judge other temperaments then as somehow part of an inferior race. The cleric needs to see that his ability to accomplish and achieve is often even a handicap for his own personal relationships. No one likes a bossy, impatient person who makes others feel insecure. If only the choleric could let his mind dwell, even momentarily, on the possibility that he has an abrasive nature, he could modify his behavior and become a truly great leader. In dealing with people, the choleric must also strive to understand others who are not like himself. Not being able to stand weaknesses in others is a major weakness in the choleric. He tends to treat others as dummies, to be scorned or to be left aside. It sometimes happens that a choleric man is attracted at first to perhaps a phlegmatic woman. He admires maybe her peaceful, controlled, patient character. He enjoys her easygoing, obliging, and calm personality. But later, after the marriage, he looks upon that as weak, dumb, and he treats her like a dummy, weak and stupid. He can't understand her temperament, which is so opposite of his. He can't understand why, after being with him for so long, she hasn't acquired some of his great abilities. And so, he treats her in this scornful way because he can't understand what is so opposite to himself. His superior attitude and demeaning treatment can even do psychological damage to his naturally submissive wife. What he needs to do is fall out of love with himself. And he needs the humility to not look upon others as wrong, stupid, and weak because they are not identical to him. In dealing with others, the choleric also needs to keep advice to himself until it's asked for. Sometimes some cholerics are very annoying because they have such a compulsion to tell everyone how to do things, when to do things, and when they're doing everything wrong. They have a compulsion to correct. A choleric assumes that everyone with the problem will love his solution. He feels that to give directions and lessons to everyone should be something appreciated. He's just there to help, even if these directions are not asked for. The choleric needs to realize that when a person is going about doing their duty, or doing a job, or doing something they like, that the choleric doesn't need to keep stepping in and say, can I show you the better way to sweep that? Or, can I show you how you really should tie this? And most often, cholerics don't ask, can I? They just step forward, shove you out of the way, and say, watch. And they show you how to do something. That can be very annoying, and the choleric doesn't realize that because they think their assistant should be so highly esteemed. And so the choleric needs to realize they should keep their advice because it will be worth a lot more if they keep it. And then when it's asked for, they can produce this great knowledge. With people, the choleric needs to tone down his approach. He needs to be less bossy, less commanding, less pushy, less intimidating. So often the cholerics don't even see themselves as intimidating, and they can't understand why anyone would find them so. It's true that cholerics often have the answers and the information. It's true that cholerics can get things done. But often the choleric is not approached by others because their manner is abrasive, gruff, and intimidating. The choleric needs to see that if this is so, that others do not approach them, that others seem to be intimidated by them, the fault is in himself. He needs to tone down, be kinder, gentler, more patient and obliging. In regard to work, the choleric has to force himself to relax. A choleric once said to his phlegmatic friend, the choleric said, all the time that I'm resting, I'm planning what I'm going to do as soon as I get up. And the phlegmatic said, that's funny. All the time that you're down, you're wishing you were up. With me, it's just the opposite. All the time I'm up, I'm wishing I were lying down. And that is so true of the choleric. They go and go and go, and they find it hard to sit still. They love to work, but they can easily overdo it. To work is good, and it is a good attribute of the choleric, but the choleric can overdo it. They must discipline themselves. Now, it's interesting because cholerics don't see it as that. They think, cholerics are very disciplined people. They are. But a choleric can be a workaholic. And a workaholic is a form of an undisciplined person. They don't see it as a problem with being disciplined, but it is. Because it requires strength to control what is sometimes an intemperance in regard to work. They can easily become workaholics. They also need to take the pressure off others in regard to work. They come pre-packaged with this single-minded effort in regard to work. And it's good, but this drive of theirs can be wearing to others. The drive of the choleric can put a terrible pressure on others. Cholerics must work at not becoming workaholics so people can enjoy being with them. And so the people don't have to run away to keep from having a nervous breakdown just being around them because they work, and work everyone around them.